A wealthy businessman hired a kind-hearted woman named Emily to care for his young daughters. The Thompson estate, located on Oak Avenue, showcased the family's prosperity with its pristine gardens and grand exterior. Inside, the laughter of children filled the halls, a stark contrast to the strained relationship between Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. Emily, a 28-year-old nanny with soft brown curls and warm eyes, stood in the kitchen preparing an after-school snack for the twins, Lily and Lucy. At 6 years old, the girls were full of energy, their blonde curls bouncing as they played around the kitchen island. "Girls, please be careful," Emily called out, her tone gentle yet firm. "Why don't you tell me about your day at school while I finish up here?" Lucy, the more talkative of the two, eagerly shared stories from their art class, while Lily quietly added her own observations. Emily listened intently, amazed at how quickly the girls had won her heart. As she placed plates of apple slices and peanut butter in front of the twins, the front door opened and Mr. Thompson walked in, his suit perfectly pressed and briefcase in hand. The girls squealed with excitement, rushing to greet him. "Daddy, you're home early," Lucy exclaimed, wrapping her arms around his legs. Mr. Thompson smiled, though Emily noticed a tension in his shoulders. "Yes, sweetheart, I thought I'd surprise you all," he replied. His eyes briefly met Emily's, and she caught a flicker of concern before he turned back to the girls. "Where's your mother?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "She's in her study," Lily replied softly. "She said she had an important call." Mr. Thompson nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. "I see. Well, why don't you two finish your snack? I'll go say hello to your mother." As he walked down the hallway, Emily couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The tension in the house had been building over the past few weeks, with whispered arguments and forced smiles at dinner. Turning her attention back to the twins, Emily pushed her worries aside. Her job was to care for the children, not to meddle in her employers' lives. Yet, as she watched Lily and Lucy happily chatting, she felt a fierce desire to protect them. Later that evening, after tucking the girls into bed, Emily lingered in the kitchen, wiping down already clean counters. The sound of a heated argument drifted from Mr. Thompson's study, and though she tried not to listen, fragments of the conversation reached her ears. "I can't keep canceling on the girls, Claire. They need their mother. Don't you dare lecture me about parenting, Michael. I'm doing important work." "More important than our family?" Emily's heart ached for the twins, sleeping peacefully upstairs, unaware of the storm brewing between their parents. She thought of her own childhood, filled with shouting matches and slammed doors, and the helplessness she had felt as a child. As she gathered her things to leave, Mrs. Thompson emerged from the study, her face flushed and eyes glistening with unshed tears. She seemed startled to see Emily. "Oh, Emily, I didn't realize you were still here," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice strained. "I was just finishing up," Emily replied. "Is everything all right?" Mrs. Thompson waved a hand dismissively. "Everything's fine, dear. Just a little disagreement about schedules. You know how it is." Emily nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. "Of course. Well, I'll see you tomorrow then." Stepping out into the cool evening air, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing in the Thompson household. She thought of Lily and Lucy, their innocent faces and trusting hearts, and silently vowed to shield them from the turmoil around them. Walking to her modest apartment a few blocks away, Emily reflected on the unexpected path that had led her to this job. 2 years ago, she never would have imagined herself working as a nanny for a wealthy family in Boston. But life had a way of surprising her. After everything she'd been through, Emily was grateful for the stability and purpose she'd found with the Thompsons. As she climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, Emily pushed aside thoughts of her troubled past. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to make a difference in the lives of 2 little girls who had come to mean the world to her. And for now, that was enough. Settling into her small apartment, Emily couldn't help but reflect on her journey. The contrast between the Thompsons' luxurious estate and her modest living space was stark, but it didn't bother her. She had known far worse. Emily's childhood had been marked by hardship and resilience. Born to a single mother battling addiction, Emily learned early on that life was rarely fair. Her earliest memories were cramped apartments, her mother's distant stare, and the constant ache of hunger. At 7, Emily entered the foster care system after her mother overdosed. She moved from home to home, never feeling like she belonged. She learned to stay invisible, to read the moods of the adults around her, and to find comfort in the company of other lost children. At 12, in one of these homes, Emily experienced a trauma that would shape her life. Her foster father, a man named Greg, had seemed kind at first. He would ruffle her hair and call her kiddo. And for a while, Emily dared to hope she had found a place to belong. But one night, Greg crept into her room, his breath reeking of alcohol. Emily froze, her body rigid with fear as his hands wandered where they shouldn't. When he tried to silence her, something inside her snapped. She fought back with a ferocity that shocked them both, screaming until Greg stumbled back. The aftermath was a blur of police statements and social worker visits. Greg was arrested, but the damage was done. Emily withdrew, building walls so high no one could reach her. She moved from home to home, her file growing thicker with notes about her difficult behavior and trust issues. It wasn't until she met Mrs. Bennett, a retired teacher who became her final foster parent, that Emily began to heal. Mrs. Bennett's patience and kindness slowly chipped away at Emily's defenses. For the first time, Emily felt seen and valued. Under Mrs. Bennett's guidance, Emily threw herself into her studies, discovering a passion for learning. She graduated high school with honors and earned a scholarship to a local community college. There, while juggling classes and part-time jobs, Emily found her calling. A volunteer position at a youth center opened her eyes to the power of mentorship. Working with children who reminded her of herself, Emily found purpose in being the stable, caring adult she had always needed. After earning her degree in early childhood education, Emily began working full-time at the youth center. She poured her heart into her work, staying late to help with homework or lend an ear to troubled teens. Her colleagues admired her intuition and ability to connect with even the most withdrawn children. Then, tragedy struck again. Mrs. Bennett, the woman who had become a mother to Emily, was diagnosed with aggressive cancer. Emily took a leave of absence to care for her. For months, Emily was at Mrs. Bennett's bedside, holding her hand through treatments and reading to her when the medication made it hard to focus. Even as Mrs. Bennett's body failed, her spirit remained strong. "You have so much love to give, Emily," she whispered one evening. "Don't let the pain of your past keep you from opening your heart. There are children out there who need you, just as you needed me," Mrs. Bennett had said. When she passed, Emily felt as though a part of her had died too. The funeral was small, attended mostly by former students whose lives Mrs. Bennett had touched. Emily stood alone by the grave long after everyone else had left, tears streaming down her face as she said goodbye to the only real parent she had ever known. In the weeks that followed, Emily found herself at a crossroads. The youth center offered her old job back, but something inside her yearned for a fresh start. It was then that she saw the ad for a nanny position with the Thompson family in Boston. The idea of leaving behind the only place she'd ever called home was terrifying, but she could almost hear Mrs. Bennett's voice urging her forward. With a mix of fear and determination, Emily applied for the job, pouring her heart into the application letter. To her surprise, the Thompsons invited her for an interview. Emily arrived at their mansion feeling out of place in her best second-hand dress, but the moment she met Lily and Lucy, something clicked. The twins, shy at first, quickly warmed to Emily's gentle demeanor and genuine interest in their chatter. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson were impressed by Emily's experience and her obvious rapport with their daughters. They offered her the job on the spot, and Emily accepted, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation about this new chapter in her life. Now, As she sat in her small apartment, surrounded by the few possessions she had brought with her from her old life, Emily felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since Mrs. Bennet's passing. The twins, with their innocence and trust, awakened in her a fierce protectiveness. She vowed to herself that she would be for Lily and Lucy what Mrs. Bennet had been for her, a source of unwavering love and support. Perhaps, in caring for these two little girls, she could finally begin to heal the wounded child still living inside her own heart. The Thompsons' pristine facade began to show cracks as the weeks passed. Emily, ever observant, noticed the increasing tension between Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, their polite smiles barely masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. Michael Thompson, a successful corporate lawyer, prided himself on his ability to provide for his family. His corner office in downtown Boston boasted an impressive view of the city skyline, a testament to his hard work and ambition. However, the long hours and high-stakes cases were taking their toll, not just on him, but on his relationship with his wife and children. Claire Thompson, equally accomplished in her own right, had recently been offered a prestigious position as head of research at a renowned pharmaceutical company. The role promised groundbreaking work in cancer treatment, a cause close to Claire's heart after losing her mother to the disease. But it also demanded more of her time and attention, pulling her away from family obligations. One evening, as Emily was preparing dinner for the twins, she overheard another heated argument from behind closed doors. "I can't believe you missed Lucy's dance recital, Claire." Michael's voice, usually so controlled, was tinged with frustration. "Do you have any idea how disappointed she was?" "Don't you dare try to guilt me, Michael," Claire shot back. "I was in the middle of a crucial experiment. Do you know how important this research is? It could save lives. And what about the lives right here in this house? Our daughters need their mother, not just a voice on the phone telling them good night." The sound of something slamming, a book or perhaps a hand on a desk, made Emily flinch. She glanced at Lily and Lucy, grateful that they were engrossed in their coloring books, seemingly oblivious to the tension. But children, Emily knew from experience, were far more perceptive than adults gave them credit for. She had noticed subtle changes in the twins' behavior over the past few weeks. Lucy, usually bubbly and outgoing, had grown quieter, her bright smile appearing less frequently. Lily, already the more reserved of the two, had become almost painfully shy, clinging to Emily like a lifeline. One afternoon, while the girls were napping, Emily found herself alone with Mrs. Thompson in the kitchen. The older woman looked tired, dark circles under her eyes betraying her exhaustion. "Mrs. Thompson," Emily began hesitantly, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right?" The girl seemed unsettled lately. Claire sighed, running a hand through her perfectly coiffed hair. "Everything's fine, Emily. It's just Michael and I are going through a rough patch. Work has been demanding for both of us." Emily nodded sympathetically. "I understand. It must be difficult balancing such important careers with family life." "You have no idea," Claire muttered, then caught herself. "I'm sorry. That was unprofessional of me. It's just, I've worked so hard to get where I am. This research could change lives, but Michael, he doesn't seem to understand how much it means to me." Emily listened, offering a comforting presence as Claire continued to vent her frustrations. It was clear that the Thompsons' marriage was under significant strain, caught between the demands of high-powered careers and the needs of a young family. As the days passed, the tension in the house continued to escalate. Emily did her best to shield the twins from their parents' conflicts, creating a bubble of normalcy and affection in their daily routines. But she couldn't completely insulate them from the changing dynamics of their family. One evening, as Emily was tucking the girls into bed, Lucy asked in a small voice, "Emily, do Mommy and Daddy not love each other anymore?" The question caught Emily off guard, her heart breaking for the confusion and fear evident in Lucy's eyes. Lily, listening intently from her own bed, looked equally anxious. "Oh, sweetie," Emily said, sitting on the edge of Lucy's bed and gathering both girls close. Your mommy and daddy love each other very much, and they love you too more than anything in the world. Sometimes, grown-ups have disagreements, but that doesn't mean they stop loving each other or their children. But they're always arguing, Lily whispered, her voice trembling, and Mommy's never home anymore. Emily took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. Your parents have very important jobs that sometimes make them very busy or stressed. But I promise you, no matter what, they will always love you and be there for you. And you know what? So will I. The girl snuggled closer to Emily, finding comfort in her warm embrace. As she held them, Emily couldn't help but reflect on her own childhood, on the fear and uncertainty she had felt during her parents' fights. She silently vowed to do everything in her power to protect Lily and Lucy from experiencing that same pain. The next morning, Emily arrived at the Thompson house to find both Mr. and Mrs. Thompson in the kitchen, their voices raised in yet another argument. She hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to interrupt. "I can't keep doing this, Claire. The girls need stability," Michael was saying, his voice strained. "And what about what I need, Michael? Am I supposed to give up everything I've worked for?" Claire retorted, her eyes flashing with anger. "I'm not asking you to give up your career, but surely we can find a balance." They fell silent as they noticed Emily standing there, both looking embarrassed at being caught in such a heated exchange. "Emily, I'm sorry you had to hear that," Michael said, straightening his tie. "Is everything all right?" Emily took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I don't mean to overstep, but I'm worried about the girls. They're picking up on the tension, and it's affecting them." The Thompsons exchanged guilty looks, the fight seeming to drain out of them. We didn't realize," Claire said softly, her anger replaced by concern. "Are they okay?" Emily nodded slowly. "They're resilient, but they need reassurance. They need to know that no matter what's happening between you two, they're loved and secure." Michael ran a hand over his face, looking suddenly older and very tired. "You're right, Emily. We've been so caught up in our own issues, we've been neglecting what's most important." As Emily excused herself to go wake the twins, she couldn't help but hope that this moment of realization might be the first step toward healing for the Thompson family. But she also knew that the road ahead would not be easy, and that the girls would need her now more than ever. So the evening started like any other in the Thompson household. Emily had just finished helping the twins with their homework and was preparing a light dinner while Mr. and Mrs. Thompson were out at a charity gala. The house was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the dishwasher and the muffled sounds of Lily and Lucy playing in their room upstairs. Emily hummed softly to herself as she chopped vegetables for a salad, her mind wandering to the upcoming weekend. She had promised the girls a trip to the zoo, and their excitement was infectious. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine that this was her family, that the love and warmth she felt for the twins was reciprocated by parents who cherished her. A sudden crash from upstairs jolted Emily from her reverie. Her heart leaped into her throat as she called out, "Girls, is everything okay up there?" Silence. Frowning, Emily wiped her hands on a dish towel and headed toward the stairs. "Lily? Lucy? Answer me, please." As she reached the bottom of the staircase, a chill ran down her spine. Something felt off. The silence was too complete, too oppressive. Emily's instincts, honed by years in the foster system, screamed danger. Slowly, cautiously, she ascended the stairs, her eyes scanning for any sign of disturbance. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the slightly ajar door of the twins' bedroom. "Girls," Emily called again, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's Emily. Are you okay?" She pushed the door open, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was a mess. Toys scattered across the floor, a lamp knocked over. But it was the open window, curtains billowing in the night breeze, that made Emily's blood run cold. Before she could react, a hand clamped over her mouth from behind, an arm snaking around her waist. Emily's scream was muffled as she was dragged backward into the darkness of the hallway. Not a sound, a gruff voice whispered in her ear, "Or the little ones get it. Understand?" Emily nodded, her mind racing. The twins. Where were they? Were they hurt? She had to find them, had to protect them. The intruder, a man judging by his strength and voice, dragged Emily down the stairs. In the dim light of the foyer, she caught a glimpse of a black mask covering his face, eyes glinting with malice behind the slits. "Where are they?" Emily managed to ask as the hand moved from her mouth, her voice shaking with fear and anger. The intruder chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Safe. For now. But their safety depends on you, sweetheart. You're going to help me get what I came for." Emily's mind whirled. What could this man possibly want? The Thompsons were wealthy, yes, but they weren't the type to keep large amounts of cash or valuables in the house. Unless... The safe? Emily whispered, realization dawning. "Smart girl." The intruder nodded. "Now, you're going to take me to Mr. Thompson's study, and you're going to help me open that safe. No tricks, no heroics. The kids' lives depend on it." As they moved through the house, Emily's eyes darted around, looking for any sign of the twins. Her heart ached at the thought of them scared and alone, possibly hurt. She had to find a way to save them. But how? In Mr. Thompson's study, the intruder shoved Emily toward the large painting behind the desk. "Remove it," he ordered. With trembling hands, Emily lifted the heavy frame, revealing the safe embedded in the wall behind it. The intruder let out a low whistle of appreciation. "Now, the combination," he demanded, pressing something hard, a gun. Emily realized with horror, against her back. I don't know it," Emily stammered, her mind racing. "I'm just a nanny. I don't have access to—" The intruder's hand connected with her cheek, the slap echoing in the quiet room. "Don't lie to me," he snarled. "I know you're close to the family. They trust you. Now open it." Tears stung Emily's eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't show weakness, not now. "I swear, I don't know the combination. Please, just let the children go. They're innocent in all this." For a moment, the intruder was silent, considering. Then he grabbed Emily's arm, dragging her back out of the study. "Fine, we'll do this the hard way." They moved through the house, the intruder's grip bruising on Emily's arm. As they passed the kitchen, her eyes landed on the block of knives on the counter. If she could just reach one. As if reading her mind, the intruder tightened his grip. "Don't even think about it, sweetheart. Remember, one wrong move, and those little angels upstairs pay the price." Emily's heart sank. She couldn't risk the twins' safety, but she had to do something. They reached the master bedroom, and Emily's eyes widened in shock. There, bound and gagged on the floor, were Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. Their eyes bulged with fear and desperation as they saw Emily. "Surprise," the intruder sneered. "Looks like the party ended early for these two. Now, let's try this again. The safe combination. Now." Mr. Thompson shook his head frantically, trying to communicate something with his eyes. Mrs. Thompson whimpered through her gag, tears streaming down her face. The intruder's patience was wearing thin. He raised his gun, pointing it at Mrs. Thompson's head. "Last chance. The combination. Or the missus gets it. Then the kids." Emily cried out, her mind working furiously. "I think I know it. Mr. Thompson told me once, in case of emergencies." The intruder lowered the gun slightly, his attention focused on Emily. "Well, spit it out." Emily took a deep breath, praying her plan would work. "It's the twins' birthday, 0618. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the muffled sobs of Mrs. Thompson. Then the intruder nodded. "All right, back to the study. And this better not be a trick." As they moved back toward the study, Emily's mind raced. She had bought some time, but what next? She needed to find the twins to make sure they were safe. And then, somehow, she had to overpower this man and get help. In the study, the intruder shoved Emily toward the safe. "Open it," he demanded. With trembling fingers, Emily input the combination she had given, 0618, the twins' birthday. She held her breath as she turned the handle. Click! The safe swung open. For a moment, the intruder was stunned. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, pushing Emily aside to peer into the safe's contents. Emily didn't hesitate. She grabbed a heavy paperweight from the desk and swung it with all her might, striking the intruder on the side of his head. He staggered, momentarily dazed. "Run!" Emily shouted to the Thompsons, who were struggling to free themselves. She bolted from the study, her heart pounding as she raced toward the twins' room. The intruder's angry shout followed her as she raced down the hallway. She could hear his heavy footsteps behind her, gaining ground quickly. Emily darted into the twins' room, locking the door behind her. Her eyes scanned the room frantically. "Lily, Lucy," she whispered urgently. "Are you here?" From the closet, two small voices answered. "Emily!" Emily rushed to the closet, finding the twins huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. "Oh, thank God," she breathed, gathering them into her arms. "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you?" The twins shook their heads, clinging to Emily like lifelines. "We were so scared," Lucy whispered. "He said he'd hurt you if we made a sound." Emily's heart broke at the terror in their voices. "It's okay now I'm here, but we need to be very brave and very quiet. Can you do that for me?" The girls nodded solemnly. Emily's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. They needed to get out of the house to get help. But how? "Listen carefully," Emily said, her voice steady despite her fear. "We're going to climb out the window and down the tree, just like we practiced for fire drills. Remember?" Lily and Lucy nodded, their faces pale but determined. Emily helped them to the window, her heart in her throat as she watched them carefully navigate the branches of the old oak tree outside. Just as Lucy, the last to go, disappeared from view, the bedroom door burst open. The intruder stood there, his mask askew, his eyes wild with anger. "You little," he snarled, lunging for Emily. Emily ducked, her foster care instincts kicking in. She rolled across the floor, grabbing a heavy trophy from the bookshelf as she came up. Without hesitation, she swung it with all her might. The trophy connected with the intruder's head with a sickening thud. He staggered, momentarily stunned. Emily didn't wait to see if he'd stay down. She scrambled for the window, her heart pounding. As she climbed out onto the tree branch, she could hear the intruder recovering, his angry curses following her into the night. The bark was rough under her hands as she shimmied down the trunk, praying the girls had made it safely to the ground. "Emily!" Lucy's frightened whisper reached her ears. "We're here." Emily dropped the last few feet, stumbling as she landed. The twins were there, reaching for her hands. Without a word, Emily scooped up Lily, the smaller of the two, and grabbed Lucy's hand. "Run," she whispered, and they took off across the moonlit lawn. They had barely made it halfway to the street when Emily heard the intruder's voice ring out behind them. "Don't stop." Lucy sprinted ahead, her small legs pumping furiously. Emily, burdened by Lily's weight, was slowing down. She could feel the intruder gaining on them. Just as they reached the sidewalk, Emily felt a hand grab her shoulder, yanking her backward. She stumbled, twisting to protect Lily from the fall. "Thought you could outsmart me, huh?" the intruder growled, looming over her. Emily looked up, her eyes meeting his through the mask. In that moment, something inside her snapped. All the fear, all the anger from her past, surged to the surface. Emily lashed out, her foot connecting solidly with the intruder's knee. He howled in pain, stumbling back. "Run, Lily!" Emily shouted, pushing the little girl toward her sister. "Go to Lucy!" As the twins ran, Emily scrambled to her feet, placing herself between the children and the intruder. She stood tall, her fists clenched at her sides, ready to fight with everything she had. The intruder lunged forward, but Emily was ready. She dodged his grasp, landing a solid punch to his solar plexus. As he doubled over, gasping for breath, Emily brought her knee up, connecting with his face. The intruder fell back, dazed. Emily didn't waste a second. She turned and ran, catching up to the twins, who had stopped a few houses down, watching with wide, frightened eyes. "Come on," Emily urged, gathering them close. "We're almost there." As they approached Mrs. Patel's house, they could hear sirens in the distance growing louder. Lucy had managed to ring the doorbell, and lights were coming on in neighboring houses. Mrs. Patel, an elderly woman who had always been kind to the twins, opened her door, her eyes widening at the sight before her. "Emily!" Mrs. Patel ushered them in, reaching for her phone. Emily allowed herself to breathe. They were safe. The girls were safe. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and paramedic checkups. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, freed from their bonds, clung to their daughters, tears streaming down their faces. As dawn broke, casting a soft glow over the neighborhood, Emily sat on the steps of the Thompsons' porch, a blanket draped over her shoulders. She watched as the police led the intruder, now unmasked and handcuffed, to a waiting squad car. Mr. Thompson approached, sitting down beside her. For a moment, they sat in silence, watching the activity around them. "Emily, Mr. Thompson finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "What you did tonight. There are no words to express our gratitude. You saved our children. You saved us all." Emily turned to him, tears welling in her eyes. "I just did what anyone would do," she said softly. Mr. Thompson shook his head. "No, Emily, what you did was extraordinary. You're not just our nanny. You're family now." As the sun rose higher, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in her life, she truly felt like she belonged. She had found her family. After all these years, she had finally found her place, and she would do anything to protect it. The days following the home invasion were a whirlwind of police interviews, media attention, and emotional turmoil for the Thompson family. The once pristine mansion now felt violated, its sense of security shattered by the intrusion. Yellow police tape cordoned off areas of the house, a stark reminder of the terror they had endured. Emily, still reeling from the events of that night, found herself thrust into a new role. No longer just a nanny, she had become a lifeline for the family, especially the twins. Lily and Lucy, traumatized by their ordeal, refused to leave Emily's side, clinging to her as if she were a talisman against the darkness that had invaded their home. On the third day after the incident, as Emily sat on the living room couch with the girls curled up against her, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson entered, their faces etched with exhaustion and worry. "Girls," Mrs. Thompson said softly, kneeling in front of them, "Daddy and I need to talk to Emily for a moment. Why don't you go up to your room and pick out some books for bedtime?" The twins exchanged a fearful glance, their grip on Emily tightening. Emily gave them a reassuring smile. "It's okay, sweethearts. I'll be right here when you come back down. I promise." Reluctantly, the girls disentangled themselves from Emily and headed upstairs, casting anxious glances back at her as they went. Once they were out of earshot, Mr. Thompson sank into an armchair, running a hand over his face. "Emily," he began, his voice heavy with emotion, "we can never repay you for what you did that night. You risked your life to save our children, to save us." Mrs. Thompson nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "We've been talking and, well, we want you to know that you're not just an employee to us anymore. You're family." Emily felt a lump form in her throat, overcome by the sincerity in their words. "I don't know what to say," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. Mr. Thompson leaned forward, his expression earnest. We want to make it official, not just as a nanny, but as a guardian for the girls. We'd like to set up a trust fund for you, ensure that you're taken care of for life." Emily's eyes widened in shock. "Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, that's too much. I was just doing my job, protecting the girls." Mrs. Thompson reached out, taking Emily's hand in hers. "It was far more than a job, Emily. You've shown us what true dedication and love look like. We want you to be a permanent part of our lives, of the girls' lives." As the weight of their offer sank in, Emily felt a mix of emotions wash over her. Gratitude, certainly, but also a lingering sense of unworthiness. Her past, with all its pain and uncertainty, seemed to whisper that she didn't deserve such generosity. I don't know what to say," Emily repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Thompson smiled gently. "You don't have to decide right now. We know this is a lot to take in. Please consider it. You're already family to us, Emily. We just want to make it official." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. The twins appeared, arms laden with books, their eyes immediately seeking out Emily. As the girls settled back onto the couch, snuggling close to Emily, Mrs. Thompson caught her husband's eye. A silent understanding passed between them. Whatever happened, Emily was now an integral part of their family unit. The next few days brought new challenges. The police had identified the intruder as Jack Morrissey, a former employee of Mr. Thompson's law firm who had been fired for misconduct 6 months prior. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community and added a new layer of complexity to the family's recovery. One evening, as Emily was tucking the twins into bed, Lucy asked the question that had been weighing on everyone's minds. "Emily," she whispered, her small hand clutching Emily's sleeve. "Will the bad man come back?" Emily's heart clenched at the fear in Lucy's voice. She sat on the edge of the bed, gathering both girls close. "No, sweetheart. The bad man is in jail now. He can't hurt you anymore." Lily, her eyes wide and serious, looked up at Emily. "But what if there are other bad men? What if they try to hurt us too?" Emily took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Listen to me, both of you. What happened was very scary, and it's okay to feel afraid. But I want you to know that you are so brave. You did everything right that night, and I promise you, your mom and dad and I, we will always do everything we can to keep you safe." The girls nodded solemnly, seeming to draw strength from Emily's words. As she kissed them goodnight and turned out the light, Emily felt the weight of her promise settle on her shoulders. She knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she would do anything to protect these children. Later that night, as Emily lay in bed in the guest room where she'd been staying since the incident, she found herself reflecting on the Thompsons' offer. The idea of having a real family, of belonging somewhere, was almost overwhelming in its appeal. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered doubts. Could she really fit into their world? Did she deserve this chance at happiness? As she drifted off to sleep, Emily's dreams were a jumble of images. The terror of the invasion, the warmth of the twins' embraces, the hopeful faces of Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. And through it all, a growing sense that perhaps, just perhaps, she had finally found her place in the world. As the dust began to settle after the home invasion, the Thompson family and Emily found themselves grappling with a new set of questions. Who was Jack Morrissey, really? What had driven him to such desperate actions? The answers, as they would soon discover, were far more complex and heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. Detective Sarah Martinez, the lead investigator on the case, arrived at the Thompson residence a week after the incident. Her sharp eyes took in the lingering signs of the break-in, the new security system being installed, and the protective way Emily hovered near the twins. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," Detective Martinez began, her voice professional but kind, "I have some information about Jack Morrissey that I think you should hear." The family gathered in the living room, tension palpable in the air. Emily sat with Lily and Lucy, their small hands clutching hers tightly. You should know Jack worked for your firm for several years, Mr. Thompson, the detective continued. He was, by all accounts, a dedicated employee, often working late and taking on extra cases. However, about 8 months ago, things began to change. Mr. Thompson leaned forward, his brow furrowed. I remember. His work started slipping. He was coming in late, looking disheveled. Of course, we tried to talk to him, but he shut us out. Detective Martinez nodded. We've pieced together what happened. Jack's wife, Elena, was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. The prognosis was poor, and the treatment options were expensive. A collective gasp went through the room. Mrs. Thompson's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Jack was desperate, the detective continued. He started embezzling funds from the firm to pay for Elena's treatments. When he was caught and fired, it was a final straw. Elena died 2 months later, leaving Jack with astronomical medical debts and a 5-year-old son to care for. The room fell silent as the weight of this revelation settled over everyone. Emily felt a conflicting surge of emotions, anger at what Jack had put them through, but also a twinge of sympathy for the desperation that had driven him. And Mr. Thompson, the detective added, Jack mentioned a safe in your study. He believed there was a large sum of cash inside, enough to pay off his debts and provide for his son. Mr. Thompson shook his head, bewildered. But that's impossible. The safe only contains some important documents and family heirlooms. There's no cash. It seems Jack's desperation led him to believe in this non-existent fortune, the detective explained. In his mind, it was his last hope. As the adults continued to discuss the implications of this new information, Emily noticed the twins' growing distress. Lucy's lower lip was trembling, and Lily's eyes were filled with unshed tears. Girls, Emily said softly, why don't we go to the kitchen and make some hot chocolate? Would that be okay? She asked, looking to Mr. and Mrs. Thompson for permission. They nodded gratefully, understanding the need to shield the children from the more distressing details of the conversation. In the kitchen, as Emily busied herself with preparing the hot chocolate, Lucy spoke up, her voice small and confused. Emily, is the bad man not really bad? Emily paused, considering how to answer. She knelt down to the girls' level, looking them both in the eye. Sometimes, sweethearts, good people can do bad things when they're scared or desperate. What Jack did was very wrong, and it hurt our family. But it's important to understand that the world isn't always simple. It's not always easy to tell who's good and who's bad. Lily's brow furrowed in concentration, like in our stories, where sometimes the villain is just sad or misunderstood. Emily nodded, impressed by the child's insight. That's right, Lily. But remember, even if we can understand why someone did something bad, it doesn't make their actions okay. As they sipped their hot chocolate, Emily couldn't help but reflect on her own past, on the times when desperation had pushed her close to the edge. She silently thanked whatever twist of fate had led her to this family, to this moment of safety and belonging. Back in the living room, the conversation had taken a somber turn. Detective Martinez was explaining the charges against Jack and the likely outcomes of his trial. Given the circumstances and his cooperation, the prosecution is willing to consider a plea deal, she explained. But ultimately, Mr. Thompson, as the victim of the crime, your input will carry significant weight. Mr. Thompson ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly older and very tired. I need time to think about this, to discuss it with my family. As Detective Martinez prepared to leave, she paused, turning back to the family. There's one more thing. Jack's son, Tommy, is currently in foster care. Jack's only living relative is an elderly aunt who's not in a position to take him in. The implications of this statement hung heavy in the air. Mrs. Thompson and Emily exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. After the detective left, the family sat in thoughtful silence. It was Emily who finally spoke up, her voice soft but determined. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I know this might not be my place, but I grew up in the foster system. It's not a fate I'd wish on any child, especially one who's already lost so much." Mrs. Thompson nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I was thinking the same thing, Emily. James, what if we could help Tommy somehow?" Mr. Thompson looked up, surprise evident on his face. "You mean take him in? Sarah, after everything that's happened, are you sure?" Mrs. Thompson reached for her husband's hand. "I know it sounds crazy, but thinking about that little boy alone and scared, don't we have a responsibility to help if we can?" As the Thompsons discussed the possibilities, the complexities of potentially helping the child of the man who had terrorized them, Emily felt a surge of admiration for their compassion. It was moments like these that reinforced her belief in the fundamental goodness of this family. Later that night, as Emily checked on the sleeping twins one last time before bed, she found herself reflecting on the day's revelations. The world, she realized, was rarely black and white. Good people could do bad things, and even in the darkest moments, there was potential for compassion and growth. As she closed the girls' bedroom door, Emily made a silent promise to herself and to the family that had taken her in. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same courage and determination that had seen her through that terrifying night. For in the end, it was love, not fear, that truly had the power to change lives. The news of the home invasion and the subsequent revelations about Jack Morrissey's motivations spread through the affluent neighborhood like wildfire. The once quiet suburb of Boston found itself thrust into the spotlight, grappling with issues of security, compassion, and social responsibility. As the Thompson family attempted to return to some semblance of normalcy, they found themselves at the center of a community divided. On a crisp Saturday morning, about 2 weeks after the incident, Emily was in the front yard with the twins, helping them plant a small garden, an activity suggested by their therapist to help them reclaim their sense of safety at home. Mrs. Patel, the kindly neighbor who had come to their aid on that fateful night, approached with a basket of freshly baked muffins. "Good morning, dears," she called out, her warm smile a balm to their frayed nerves. "I thought you could use a little treat." As Emily thanked her, accepting the basket, she noticed a group of neighbors gathered across the street, their hushed voices and furtive glances making it clear they were discussing the Thompson family. "Don't mind them," Mrs. Patel said softly, noticing Emily's discomfort. "Some people don't know how to mind their own business." Just then, a sleek SUV pulled up to the curb. Out stepped Diane Holbrook, the self-appointed leader of the Neighborhood Watch and notorious busybody. Her perfectly coiffed hair and designer outfit seemed out of place in the informal Saturday morning atmosphere. "Ah, Sarah, James," Diane called out as the Thompsons emerged from the house, her voice saccharine sweet. "I hope we're not interrupting. We've been so worried about you all." Mr. Thompson forced a polite smile. "Thank you, Diane. We're doing as well as can be expected." Diane's eyes darted to Emily and the twins, a hint of disapproval in her gaze. "Yes, well, that's actually why we're here. The Neighborhood Association has some concerns." Mrs. Thompson stiffened, her protective instincts flaring. "Concerns? About what exactly?" Diane cleared her throat, clearly relishing her moment in the spotlight. "Well, for starters, there's the matter of security. This incident has put all of our homes at risk. We've had several families express interest in moving out of the area." Mr. Thompson frowned. "We've upgraded our security system, Diane. The police have assured us this was an isolated incident. Be that as it may," Diane continued undeterred, "there's also the matter of reputation. The media attention has been quite disruptive. And now, with these rumors about you possibly taking in the child of that criminal, well, you can understand our concerns." Emily felt a surge of anger at Diane's words. She glanced at the twins, relieved to see they were absorbed in their planting and seemingly oblivious to the tense conversation. Mrs. Thompson, however, was not about to back down. "Diane," she said, her voice low and controlled, I appreciate your concern, but what we choose to do as a family is our business. If showing compassion to a child who's lost everything somehow damages the neighborhood's reputation, then perhaps it's the neighborhood's values that need examining, not our actions. A murmur went through the gathered neighbors. Some nodded in agreement with Mrs. Thompson, while others scowled, clearly siding with Diane. Just then, a new voice joined the fray. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing." A man stepped forward from the group. Emily recognized him as Dr. Amir Hassan, a respected pediatrician who lived a few houses down. "I, for one, commend the Thompson family for their courage and compassion," Dr. Hassan continued. "What happened to them was terrible, but their response, to consider helping a child in need despite their own trauma, that's the kind of neighborly spirit we should be celebrating, not condemning." His words seemed to break the tension. Several other neighbors voiced their agreement, stepping forward to offer support to the Thompson family. Diane, seeing the tide turn against her, huffed indignantly. "Well, I can see where this is going. Don't say I didn't warn you when property values start to drop." With that, she turned on her heel and marched back to her SUV. As the impromptu gathering dispersed, Emily couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. The support from some neighbors was heartening, but the underlying current of judgment and fear was unsettling. Later that afternoon, as Emily was helping the twins wash up after their gardening adventure, Mrs. Thompson joined them in the kitchen. "Emily," she said softly, "I want to thank you for everything you've done, not just during the break-in, but every day since. The way you've been there for the girls, for all of us, it means more than I can say." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. "Mrs. Thompson." "Sarah, please." Mrs. Thompson interrupted with a gentle smile. "I think we're well past formalities, don't you?" Emily nodded, blinking back tears. "Sarah, I just want you to know that this family means everything to me. I'll do whatever it takes to help us all get through this." Mrs. Thompson reached out, squeezing Emily's hand. "We know, sweetheart, and that's why we want to make it official. Michael and I have been talking, and we'd like to start the process of making you the girls' legal guardian. In addition to us, of course." Emily's eyes widened in shock. "Legal guardian? But are you sure?" "More sure than we've ever been about anything," Mrs. Thompson affirmed. "Your family, Emily. It's time we made it official." As the weight of this offer settled over her, Emily felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. Looking at the twins, their faces smeared with dirt from the garden but beaming with happiness, she knew that she had found her home. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be more challenges, more judgments to face. But in that moment, surrounded by the love of her chosen family, Emily knew they could face anything together. The Thompson family found themselves at a moral crossroads. The decision to potentially help Tommy, Jack Morrissey's son, weighed heavily on their minds. It was a choice that would not only affect their family, but could have far-reaching implications for their community and their own healing process. One evening, after the twins had been tucked into bed, the adults gathered in Mr. Thompson's study. The room, once a scene of terror, had been reclaimed and redecorated, a symbol of the family's resilience. Emily, now an integral part of these family discussions, sat in a comfortable armchair, while Mr. and Mrs. Thompson occupied the small sofa. "I've spoken with my contacts at Child Protective Services," Mr. Thompson began, his voice tinged with a mix of concern and determination. "Tommy's situation is, well, it's not good. He's been bounced between 3 foster homes in the past month. He's withdrawing, barely speaking. The trauma of losing both parents, one to death and one to imprisonment, it's taking its toll." Mrs. Thompson leaned forward, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "That poor child, Michael. We have to do something. We can't just stand by knowing he's suffering." Emily nodded in agreement, but she couldn't help voicing the concern that had been nagging at her. "I completely agree that Tommy needs help, but are we the right people to provide it? After everything that's happened, Won't it be traumatic for him to be associated with a family his father tried to rob? Mr. Thompson sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Are we helping Tommy, or are we just trying to assuage our own guilt? The room fell silent as they each contemplated the complexities of the situation. It was Mrs. Thompson who finally broke the silence, her voice soft but determined. "I've been thinking about this a lot," she began. "About why we're considering this, about what it means for our family, for Tommy, for Jack even. And I've realized something. This isn't about guilt. It's about breaking a cycle." Emily and Mr. Thompson looked at her questioningly, prompting her to continue. "Think about it. Jack's actions were born out of desperation, out of a system that failed him and his family. If we have the opportunity to show Tommy a different path, to provide him with the support and love he needs, isn't that our moral obligation? Not because of what his father did, but in spite of it." Mr. Thompson nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're right, Sarah. If we turn our backs on Tommy, we're just perpetuating the same cycle of neglect and desperation that led to this whole situation." Emily felt a surge of admiration for the Thompsons' compassion, but she also felt compelled to voice another concern. What about the girls? How will this affect Lily and Lucy? They're still dealing with the trauma of the break-in. Is it fair to ask them to accept the son of the man who terrorized them into their home? It was a valid point, and one that gave them all pause. The twins' well-being had to be their primary concern. After a moment of reflection, Mr. Thompson spoke up. "You're right, Emily. We can't make this decision without considering the girls. I think we need to talk to them about it. They're young, yes, but they're also incredibly perceptive and empathetic. We should give them a chance to understand and be part of this decision." Mrs. Thompson and Emily agreed, and they decided to have a family meeting the next day to discuss the matter with the twins. The following afternoon, they gathered in the living room. Lily and Lucy, sensing the seriousness of the situation, sat quietly, their eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. Mr. Thompson began gently, explaining in simple terms about Tommy's situation. He carefully avoided the more traumatic details, focusing instead on the fact that Tommy was a little boy who had lost his parents and needed help. "Girls," Mrs. Thompson said softly, "we're thinking about inviting Tommy to come live with us, to be part of our family. But we wanted to talk to you about it first. How would you feel about that?" The twins were quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then Lucy spoke up, her voice small but clear. "Would he be our brother?" "In a way, yes," Mr. Thompson answered. "He would be like a foster brother, someone we care for and who becomes part of our family." Lily, always the more thoughtful of the two, furrowed her brow. "But isn't Tommy the son of the bad man who came to our house?" Emily felt her heart clench at the fear that flashed across Lily's face. She knelt down in front of the girls, taking their hands in hers. "Yes, sweetie, he is," Emily said gently. "But remember what we talked about? How sometimes good people can do bad things when they're scared or desperate. Tommy isn't responsible for what his dad did. He's just a little boy who's alone and scared. Kind of like I was before I found you all." The girls' eyes widened at this, looking from Emily to their parents. It was clear they were making connections, understanding on a level that belied their young age. After a moment, Lucy spoke again. "If Tommy comes to live with us, will he be sad and scared like we were after the bad night?" Mr. Thompson moved to sit beside his daughters, pulling them close. "He might be, sweetheart. He's been through a lot, but that's why we're considering this. Because we think that maybe with love and support and time, we could help him feel safe and happy again. Just like we're all working on feeling safe and happy again together." Lily and Lucy exchanged a look, seeming to have a silent conversation. Then, to everyone's surprise, they both nodded. "We want to help Tommy," Lily said softly. "Even if he's scared at first, we can show him it's okay, right, Emily?" Emily felt tears prick her eyes at the girls' compassion. "That's right, sweethearts. We can all help Tommy feel safe and loved. As the family continued to discuss the practicalities and potential challenges of bringing Tommy into their home, Emily marveled at the resilience and empathy of the Thompson family. They had taken her in, made her feel like she belonged for the first time in her life, and now they were extending that same grace to a child who, by all rights, they could have turned their backs on. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be legal hurdles to overcome, therapy sessions to attend, and undoubtedly moments of doubt and difficulty. But as Emily looked around at this family that had become her own, she felt a sense of hope and determination. They had survived the terror of the break-in. They had faced their community's judgment and stood firm in their beliefs. And now, they were choosing to turn a tragedy into an opportunity for healing and growth. Together, they would write a new chapter in their family's story, one of compassion, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of chosen family. The decision to bring Tommy into their lives set in motion a series of events that would challenge the Thompson family in ways they never expected. As they began the process of becoming Tommy's foster family, they found themselves diving deep into paperwork, background checks, and home studies. One sunny afternoon, as Mr. and Mrs. Thompson were going through old documents to provide to social services, Emily was in the backyard with the twins, engaging them in a game of hide-and-seek. The girls' laughter echoed through the air, a sound that had become more frequent as they slowly healed from their trauma. Inside the house, Mrs. Thompson was rifling through a file cabinet when she came across a folder she hadn't seen in years. A breath caught in her throat as she opened it, revealing adoption papers from 6 years ago. "Michael," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Can you come here for a moment?" Mr. Thompson entered the room, his brow furrowed at the tone of his wife's voice. "What is it, Sarah?" Mrs. Thompson held out the papers, her hands shaking. "Do you remember these? We never told anyone, not even the girls." Mr. Thompson took the documents, his eyes widening as he scanned their contents. The adoption papers for Lucy. God, I'd almost forgotten. We've always treated them exactly the same. It just never seemed important to bring up. As they stood there, grappling with this long-buried secret, they didn't notice Emily entering the room, a concerned look on her face. "Is everything okay?" The girls were wondering if. Emily stopped short, noticing the tension in the room. "What's wrong?" Mr. and Mrs. Thompson exchanged a glance, silently debating whether to share this information. Finally, Mrs. Thompson spoke. "Emily, there's something you should know, something we've never told anyone." She took a deep breath. Lucy is adopted. We adopted her as a newborn, just days after Lily was born." Emily felt as if the wind had been knocked out of her. She sank into a nearby chair, her mind reeling. But they're twins. They look so alike. How is that possible? Mr. Thompson sighed, running a hand through his hair. It was a miracle, really. We had been trying to have a child for years. When Sarah finally got pregnant, we were overjoyed. But then we got a call from the adoption agency. A baby girl had been born, and the birth mother had chosen us. And we couldn't bear to say no, even though we were expecting Lily. The girls were born just 3 days apart, Mrs. Thompson continued, her eyes misty with memories. But they looked so similar, it was uncanny. We decided to raise them as twins. We thought it would be easier that way, that it would protect Lucy from feeling different or unwanted. Emily sat in stunned silence, processing this revelation. The girls she had come to love as her own were not, in fact, biological twins. Yet their bond was undeniable, their connection deeper than mere DNA. "Does anyone else know?" Emily asked softly. Mr. Thompson shook his head. "Just us, and now you. We've never told a soul, not even our parents. We've always treated them exactly the same, loved them equally. They are both our daughters in every way that matters." Emily nodded slowly, understanding the weight of the secret she now carried. "What made you decide to tell me now?" Mrs. Thompson smiled sadly. With Tommy coming into our lives, with all this talk of fostering and adoption, it just felt wrong to keep this from you. But you're part of this family now, Emily. You deserve to know the whole truth. As the implications of this revelation sank in, Emily found herself grappling with a mix of emotions. On one hand, she was touched by the trust the Thompsons had placed in her by sharing this secret. On the other, she couldn't help but wonder about the ethical implications of keeping such a significant truth from the girls. What about Lily and Lucy? Emily asked hesitantly. Do you plan to tell them? Mr. and Mrs. Thompson exchanged a pained look. We debated it over the years, Mr. Thompson admitted, but we've always been afraid of how it might affect them, especially Lucy. They're so close, so connected. We didn't want to risk damaging that bond. Emily nodded, understanding their concern. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that secrets, no matter how well-intentioned, had a way of coming to light eventually. I understand, Emily said softly, and I'm honored that you trust me with this. But maybe with Tommy coming into our lives, it's time to consider being open with the girls. They're young, but they're incredibly resilient and understanding. This could be an opportunity to strengthen your family bond even further. As the three adults sat in thoughtful silence, the sound of the twins' laughter drifted in from the backyard. The joy in their voices was a poignant reminder of the love that truly defined this family, regardless of biology or paperwork. The Thompson family stood at another crossroads, facing yet another decision that would shape their future. As they contemplated the best path forward, one thing was clear. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, bound by love and the unbreakable ties of their chosen family. The weeks following the home invasion and the subsequent revelations had been a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments for the Thompson family. As they navigated the complex process of potentially fostering Tommy and grappled with the secret of Lucy's adoption, they also faced the ongoing challenge of healing from their shared trauma. Dr. Lydia Chun, a highly recommended child psychologist specializing in trauma, had become a regular presence in their lives. The family had committed to both individual and group therapy sessions, determined to work through their fears and anxieties together. On a crisp autumn morning, Emily sat in the waiting room of Dr. Chen's office, idly flipping through a magazine as she waited for the twins to finish their joint session. The door opened, and Lily and Lucy emerged hand in hand, their faces a mix of emotions. Dr. Chen followed, her warm smile reassuring as she addressed Emily. The girls did wonderfully today. We made some real progress. Emily knelt down, opening her arms as the twins rushed to embrace her. I'm so proud of you both, she murmured, holding them close. How about we get some ice cream to celebrate? As they left the office, Emily couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of these two young girls. They had been through so much, yet here they were, still able to smile and find joy in simple pleasures. Later that evening, after the twins had been tucked into bed, the adults gathered in the living room for their own session with Dr. Chen. The atmosphere was tense, charged with unspoken concerns and lingering fears. How have things been this week? Dr. Chen asked, her voice gentle but probing. Mrs. Thompson sighed, running a hand through her hair. It's been challenging. We're still waiting to hear back about Tommy. And then there's the matter of... She trailed off, glancing nervously at her husband. Mr. Thompson picked up where she left off. We'd been grappling with whether to tell the girls about Lucy's adoption. It feels like we're carrying this enormous secret, and with everything else going on, Dr. Chen nodded understandingly. It's a lot to process. Let's break it down. First, how are you all feeling about the possibility of Tommy joining your family? Emily spoke up, her voice soft but determined. I think we're all a bit nervous but also excited. The girls especially seem eager to help Tommy feel welcome. That's wonderful, Dr. Chen smiled. It's a big change, but it sounds like you're approaching it with open hearts. Now, about Lucy's adoption, what are your main concerns about telling the girls? Mr. and Mrs. Thompson exchanged a look. It was Mrs. Thompson who finally answered. We're afraid it might change their relationship. They're so close, so connected. What if Lucy feels less a part of the family? What if Lily treats her differently? Dr. Chin leaned forward, her expression serious. Those are valid concerns, but I want you to consider something. Secrets, especially big ones like this, have a way of creating distance, even when we don't realize it. By keeping this from the girls, you might inadvertently be creating the very divide you're trying to avoid. The room fell silent as they all absorbed this. Emily found herself nodding slowly, thinking back to her own experiences in the foster system. The pain of feeling like an outsider, of not knowing her true history. I think Dr. Chin is right, Emily said softly. From my experience, knowing the truth, even if it's difficult, is usually better than living with uncertainty or finding out later in a way you can't control. Mr. Thompson sighed heavily. You're both right, of course. We've just been so afraid of disrupting their bond or causing Lucy pain. It's understandable, Dr. Chin reassured them. You've been protecting Lucy out of love. But children are incredibly resilient and often more understanding than we give them credit for. This could be an opportunity to deepen your family bond, to show Lucy that she was chosen, wanted, loved from the very beginning. As the session continued, they discussed strategies for approaching this conversation with the girls. Dr. Chin emphasized the importance of using age-appropriate language, of reassuring both girls of their place in the family, and of being prepared for a range of reactions. Remember, Dr. Chin said as the session drew to a close, this isn't just about sharing information. It's about reaffirming your love and commitment to both girls and to each other as a family unit. The next few days were filled with nervous anticipation. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson spent hours discussing how best to approach the conversation, rehearsing what they would say. Emily offered her support, ready to be there for the girls in whatever capacity they needed. Finally, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the family gathered in the living room. The twins, sensing the seriousness of the moment, sat close together on the couch, their eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. Mr. Thompson took a deep breath, sharing a look with his wife before beginning. Girls, we have something very important to tell you. It's about our family, about how we became a family. Mrs. Thompson reached out, taking Lucy's small hand in hers. Lucy, sweetheart, do you remember how we've always told you that you and Lily are our miracle babies? Lucy nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. Well, Mrs. Thompson continued, her voice soft and filled with love, you are a miracle, but in a slightly different way than we've explained before. You see, while I was pregnant with Lily, we got a call about a very special baby girl who needed a family. That baby was you, Lucy. The room fell silent as the twins processed this information. Lily was the first to speak, her voice small and confused. But we're twins, aren't we? Mr. Thompson smiled gently. You are twins in every way that matters. You were born just days apart, and from the moment we brought Lucy home, you two have been inseparable, sisters bound by love and by choice. Lucy sat very still, her eyes wide. So, you're not my real parents? Mrs. Thompson pulled Lucy into a tight embrace. Oh, sweetheart, we are your real parents. We chose you. We loved you from the very first moment we saw you. Biology doesn't make a family, love does. Emily, watching from nearby, felt tears prick her eyes at the raw emotion in the room. She could see the twins processing, their young minds grappling with this new reality. Lily suddenly turned to Lucy, her face serious. You're still my sister, right? This doesn't change anything. Lucy nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. I don't want anything to change. Nothing has to change, Emily spoke up, moving to sit beside the girls. Family isn't just about who gives birth to you. It's about who loves you, who's there for you no matter what. Look at me. I'm part of this family too, aren't I? And we're thinking of bringing Tommy into our family. Love is what makes a family, and there's plenty of love in this room. The twins looked at Emily, then at each other, before launching themselves into a group hug with their parents. There were tears, yes, but also laughter and an overwhelming sense of relief and love. As the evening wore on, the family talked more, answering the girls' questions as honestly as they could. There were moments of confusion, of sadness, but also moments of profound connection and reaffirmation of their bond. Later that night, as Emily was tucking the twins into bed, Lucy spoke up, her voice small but clear. "Emily, do you think my birth mom loved me?" Emily's heart clenched at the question. She sat on the edge of Lucy's bed, choosing her words carefully. "I'm sure she did, sweetheart. Sometimes, loving someone means making really hard choices. Your birth mom loved you so much that she wanted to make sure you had the best life possible, even if she couldn't be the one to give it to you." Lucy nodded, seeming to accept this. "I'm glad she chose Mom and Dad, and I'm glad I have Lily and you, Emily." From her bed, Lily piped up, "We're all chosen family, like how we're choosing Tommy to be our brother." Emily smiled, touched by the girls' understanding and acceptance. "That's right, sweethearts. We're all chosen family, and that makes our love even more special." As she turned out the light and closed the door, Emily felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead would still have its challenges, integrating Tommy into their lives, continuing to heal from their shared trauma. But they would face it all together, bound by a love that transcended biology and circumstance. In the quiet of the hallway, Emily allowed herself a moment of reflection. From a lonely, traumatized child in the foster system to a beloved member of this incredible family, her journey had been long and often painful. But standing here now, part of a family that valued love and honesty above all else, she knew that every step had been worth it. With a heart full of gratitude and hope for the future, Emily headed downstairs to join Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. They had more plans to make, more love to give, and a family bond that grew stronger with each challenge they faced together. The decision to visit Jack Morrissey in prison was not an easy one. It came after weeks of intense discussions, therapy sessions, and soul-searching. The Thompson family, including Emily, had debated the pros and cons, the potential risks and benefits, not just for themselves but for Tommy as well. On a gray, overcast morning, they found themselves driving to the state penitentiary. The atmosphere in the car was tense, a mixture of apprehension and determination. Mr. Thompson gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. Mrs. Thompson sat beside him, her hand resting reassuringly on his arm. In the back seat, Emily sat between the twins, who were uncharacteristically quiet, their small hands clasped tightly in hers. As they pulled into the prison parking lot, Mrs. Thompson turned to face the back seat. "Remember, girls, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. We can wait in the visitors' area while Dad and Emily talk to Mr. Morrissey." Lily and Lucy exchanged a look, then shook their heads in unison. "We want to go," Lucy said softly. For Tommy, Emily felt a surge of pride at their bravery. These two little girls, who had every reason to be terrified, were willing to face their fears for the sake of a boy they hadn't even met yet. The process of entering the prison was intimidating. The metal detectors, the stern-faced guards, the clanging of distant doors. It all served as a stark reminder of where they were and why. Emily kept a protective arm around the twins, feeling their small bodies tense with each new sound. Finally, they were led to a small, sterile room. A table with chairs on either side dominated the space. On one wall, a large mirror reflected their nervous faces back at them. "He'll be brought in shortly," the guard informed them before stepping out, the door closing with a definitive click. The minutes ticked by slowly. Mr. Thompson paced the length of the room, while Mrs. Thompson sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. Emily tried to distract the twins with a quiet game of I Spy, but their attention kept drifting to the door. When it finally opened, the room fell silent. Jack Morrissey, dressed in a drab prison uniform, was led in by a guard. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched, dark circles under his eyes. When he saw the Thompson family, he froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. You came," he said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't think you would." Mr. Thompson stepped forward, his face a mask of carefully controlled emotion. "We're here to talk about Tommy." At the mention of his son's name, Jack seemed to crumple. He sank into the chair across from them, his head in his hands. "How is he? Is he okay?" Mrs. Thompson spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. "He's struggling, Mr. Morrissey. He's been through a lot. That's why we're here." Jack looked up, confusion evident on his face. "I don't understand." Emily decided it was time to speak up. "Mr. Morrissey, we're here because we're considering becoming Tommy's foster family. But we wanted to talk to you first, to understand the situation better." Jack's eyes darted between them, disbelief and hope warring on his face. You want to take care of Tommy? After what I did to you?" Mr. Thompson took a deep breath. "What you did was wrong, Mr. Morrissey. You terrorized our family, traumatized our children. But Tommy is innocent in all this. He shouldn't have to suffer for your mistakes." Tears welled up in Jack's eyes. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I was desperate. Elena, my wife. The cancer treatments. I didn't know what else to do." Mrs. Thompson reached across the table, not quite touching Jack, but offering a gesture of understanding. "We know about Elena, about the medical bills. We're so sorry for your loss." Jack nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Tommy, he's all I have left, and now, because of what I did, I might lose him too." It was then that Lucy, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Mr. Morrissey, we're going to take good care of Tommy. We promise." Jack looked at the little girl, recognition dawning in his eyes. You were there that night. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I never meant to scare you." Lucy nodded solemnly. "It's okay. We know you were sad and scared too." Lily chimed in, her voice small but clear. "Tommy's going to be our brother. We'll make sure he's happy." Jack's composure broke at the twins' words. He sobbed openly, overwhelmed by their innocence and forgiveness. "Thank you," he managed between sobs. "Thank you for being so kind to my boy." The rest of the visit passed in a blur of emotions. They discussed Tommy's likes and dislikes, his favorite toys and foods. Jack shared stories of Tommy as a baby, of Elena's love for their son. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. As they prepared to leave, Jack looked at each of them in turn, his gaze finally settling on Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. "I know I have no right to ask this, but will you tell Tommy that I love him, that I'm sorry for everything?" Mr. Thompson nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "We will, Mr. Morrissey, and we'll make sure he knows about his mother, about the love you both had for him." As they left the prison, the family was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't until they were back in the car that Mrs. Thompson spoke. "Are we doing the right thing?" she asked softly. Emily looked at the twins, who had fallen asleep leaning against each other, their faces peaceful. She thought of Tommy, alone and scared, waiting for a family to love him. She thought of Jack, a man who had made terrible mistakes, but who clearly loved his son. "Yes," Emily said with conviction, "we're doing the right thing. It won't be easy, but we're giving Tommy a chance at a better life. And maybe, in some small way, we're helping to break a cycle of desperation and fear." As they drove home, the clouds began to part, letting through the first rays of sunshine. It felt, to Emily, like a sign. A new chapter was beginning, not just for Tommy, but for all of them. A chapter of healing, of forgiveness, and of the incredible power of chosen family. 6 months had passed since the Thompson family's visit to Jack Morrissey in prison. The autumn leaves had given way to winter snow, and now spring was beginning to blossom in the suburbs of Boston. The Thompson residence, once a scene of terror and trauma, had transformed into a haven of healing and hope. Tommy, now an integral part of the family, sat at the kitchen table, his tongue poking out in concentration as he worked on a colorful drawing. At 8 years old, he was still adjusting to his new life, but the progress he had made was remarkable. The once withdrawn and frightened boy now laughed freely, his eyes sparkling with newfound joy. Emily watched him from the kitchen counter, a warm smile on her face. She marveled at how seamlessly Tommy had fit into their lives, how the twins had embraced him as a brother, and how the entire family had grown stronger through the challenges they'd faced together. "What are you drawing, buddy?" Emily asked, placing a glass of milk beside Tommy's artwork. Tommy looked up, grinning proudly. "It's our family. See, there's Mom and Dad and Lily and Lucy and you, Emily, and that's me in the middle." Emily's heart swelled at his words. Our family. It still amazed her sometimes how she had gone from a lonely, traumatized child in the foster system to a beloved member of this extraordinary family. The sound of laughter from the backyard drew their attention. Through the window, they could see Mr. Thompson pushing the twins on the swing set, Mrs. Thompson cheering them on. The scene was one of pure, unbridled happiness. "Why don't you go join them, Tommy?" Emily suggested. "I think your picture can wait for a bit." Tommy nodded eagerly, abandoning his drawing and racing outside. Emily watched as he was immediately swept up into the game, Mr. Thompson lifting him in the air as the twins giggled in delight. As she observed the joyful scene, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The night of the break-in felt like a lifetime ago, yet its impact had shaped them all in profound ways. The family had continued their therapy sessions with Dr. Chun, working through their trauma and fears. It hadn't been easy. There had been nightmares, panic attacks, and moments of doubt, but they had faced each challenge together, supporting one another with unwavering love and patience. Telling the twins about Lucy's adoption had been a turning point. While it had initially caused some confusion and tears, it had ultimately strengthened their bond. Lucy, knowing she had been chosen and loved from the start, blossomed with a new sense of security. Hazel, ever protective of her sister, had declared that being adopted just made Harper extra special. The addition of Tommy to their family had brought its own set of challenges. There were difficult questions to answer, adjustments to be made, but the love and acceptance that flowed so freely in the Thompson household had worked its magic. Tommy, once so lost and alone, had found his place in the world. Emily's thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of the doorbell. She opened the front door to find Detective Martinez standing on the porch, a gentle smile on her face. "Good afternoon, Emily," the detective greeted her. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Emily shook her head, inviting the detective inside. "Not at all. Is everything okay?" Detective Martinez nodded, her expression softening. "Everything's fine. I just wanted to give you all an update in person. Jack Morrissey's sentence has been reduced due to good behavior and the circumstances of his case. He'll be eligible for parole in a year." The news hit Emily like a wave, a mix of emotions washing over her. She called out to the family, and soon they were all gathered in the living room, listening intently as Detective Martinez explained the situation. "What does this mean for Tommy?" Mrs. Thompson asked, her arm protectively around the boy's shoulders. Detective Martinez smiled reassuringly. "That's entirely up to you. Jack has expressed his desire to be part of Tommy's life, but he understands that it's your decision. He's been attending therapy and parenting classes in prison. He wants to do right by his son." The room fell silent as they all processed this information. It was Tommy who finally spoke up, his voice small but clear. "Can I see my dad?" Mr. Thompson knelt down in front of Tommy, looking him in the eye. "If that's what you want, buddy, we'll make it happen. Your dad loves you very much, and he's working hard to be a better person." Tommy nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I miss him, but you're my family now too, all of you. Mrs. Thompson pulled Tommy into a tight embrace. "Oh, sweetheart, we'll always be your family. Nothing will ever change that. Your dad being in your life doesn't mean you'll lose us." As the family continued to discuss the implications of Jack's potential release, Emily found herself filled with a sense of hope. They had come so far, overcome so much. This new challenge was just another opportunity for growth, for extending the circles of love and forgiveness that defined their family. Later that evening, as Emily tucked the children into bed, she was struck by the peace that had settled over the house. In the twins' room, Lily and Lucy were already fast asleep, their hands clasped even in slumber. In Tommy's room, the boy looked up at Emily with trusting eyes. "Emily," he whispered as she pulled the covers up to his chin, "do you think my dad will like our family?" Emily smiled, brushing a lock of hair from Tommy's forehead. "I think he'll love our family, buddy, because he loves you, and we love you. And love has a way of growing and connecting people in the most wonderful ways." As Emily turned out the light and closed Tommy's door, she paused in the hallway, overwhelmed by a sense of gratitude. This house, once a site of fear and trauma, had become a sanctuary of love and healing. The family they had built, through blood, adoption, fostering, and choice, was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of unconditional love. Emily made her way downstairs, where Mr. and Mrs. Thompson were waiting with warm smiles and open arms. As she joined them, Emily knew with absolute certainty that she was home. Whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together, bound by the unbreakable ties of their chosen family. The end. In the depths of our darkest moments, when fear and trauma threaten to consume us, it is love that lights the way forward. This story teaches us that family is not defined by blood, but by the choices we make every day to support, forgive, and cherish one another. It reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable fear and betrayal, we have the power to choose compassion. That in opening our hearts to those who have wronged us, we not only heal them, but also heal ourselves. The journey of the Thompson family shows us that true strength lies not in the absence of fear, but in the courage to face it head-on, hand in hand with those we love. It teaches us that every child deserves a chance at happiness, regardless of the circumstances of their birth or the mistakes of their parents. This story challenges us to look beyond our comfort zones, to extend our circle of love to those who need it most. It asks us to consider, what would the world look like if we all chose to respond to hurt with healing, to meet hatred with understanding? Remember, every act of kindness, every choice to forgive, every decision to love in the face of fear, these are the threads that weave the fabric of a better world. In the end, it's not about the family we're born into, but the family we choose to create, nurture, and fight for. So, let this story be a reminder that even in our most broken moments, we have the power to rebuild, to redefine, and to create a love that knows no bounds. For in the tapestry of life, it is love that mends the tears, strengthens the weak spots, and creates a masterpiece of resilience and hope. Dear friends, we hope this story has touched your heart and perhaps even inspired you in some way. Your feedback means the world to us and helps shape the content we create. If you enjoyed this tale of love, forgiveness, and the true meaning of family, we'd be thrilled if you could leave a comment with the number 1. And for those of you eager to dive deeper into the lives of the Thompson family, their challenges and triumphs, let us know by commenting too. Your enthusiasm fuels our creativity. Of course, we value all perspectives. If there are aspects of the story you didn't quite agree with or would like to discuss further, please share your thoughts. Your insights help us grow and improve. And lastly, if you found value in our storytelling, consider subscribing to our channel. Your support enables us to continue crafting these heartfelt narratives and reaching more people with messages of hope and resilience. Remember, every comment, every subscription is a vote of confidence in our team and our mission to touch lives through storytelling. Thank you for being part of our journey.